This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. This is about something quieter, more dangerous, something that only becomes visible when the system stops resisting. Right now, power is being tested, not in public, not loudly, but in the places most people never look, in procedures, in emergency language, in moments when restraint is treated as betrayal. You are being told to focus on noise, but the real story is happening underneath it. A line that used to be solid is starting to bend, not snapped, not crossed, bent. And once a system learns that bending works, it doesn't straighten itself out. What you are watching is not chaos. It's calibration, a measurement of how much pressure the system can absorb before it yields. If you miss this moment, the next one won't look like a warning. It will look like the new normal. Stay with me. Because the cause isn't obvious yet, and the mechanism is already in motion. What actually controls the system right now is not ideology, not elections, not even popularity. It's leverage. Leverage created by declaring everything urgent. Leverage created by framing every limit as a threat. Leverage created when speed replaces deliberation. Power no longer moves through debate, it moves through exceptions. When something is labeled an emergency, normal rules pause. Oversight slows, questions wait, authority compresses inward. And here's the critical shift most people miss. The system starts responding to tone, not law. The louder the urgency, the faster institutions step aside, not because they agree, but because delay feels dangerous. This is how control changes hands without a vote. Not seized. Handed over. Personalities didn't design this, they discovered it. And once discovered, it becomes reusable. That's why the conflict you're seeing isn't about loyalty. It's about who decides when the rules stop applying. And that question is about to get much harder to avoid. There was a time when this kind of power moved slowly, deliberately, with friction, before extraordinary authority required extraordinary consensus. Debate happened first, justification followed, then action. Now the order has flipped. Action comes first, explanation comes later, if it comes at all. What changed wasn't a law, it was expectation. The system learned to tolerate acceleration. Deadlines blurred. Processes stretched. Temporary measures stayed in place long enough to feel permanent. And because nothing collapsed immediately, it felt safe. That's the danger of gradual shifts. They don't announce themselves. They normalize. Each step seems reasonable in isolation. Each exception feels justified by context, until context becomes permanent. The system didn't break. It adapted. And adaptation, when driven by pressure instead of principle, quietly rewrites what restraint means. What once required permission now requires objection. Silence becomes consent. Delay becomes disloyalty. That's the shift. And it's already been absorbed, which is why the next moment didn't arrive as a surprise. It arrived as a test. Then the system flinched, not publicly, not all at once, but enough to be noticed by the people who sit closest to the levers. A formal restraint was triggered, quietly advanced, not symbolic, binding. It wasn't about disagreement. It was about prevention, because words had crossed into territory where consequences stop being theoretical, where rhetoric activates machinery that doesn't ask permission once it's moving. What made this moment different was not the action itself. It was who supported it, not opponents, insiders, people who understand how fast escalation happens once authority is assumed rather than granted, people who have seen how emergency language shortens decision chains, people who know that once force is implied, planning begins, whether anyone votes or not. This wasn't defiance. It was a break. And the response to that break was immediate, personal, explosive, not an argument, a warning. That reaction exposed something vital, because when restraint triggers rage, it tells you the system wasn't meant to slow down. And that's where this stops being procedural and becomes dangerous. Here's how it actually works. Emergency language doesn't just authorize action, it rearranges responsibility. When something is framed as urgent, accountability diffuses, decisions move upward, consequences move downward. Authority concentrates in one place. Risk spreads everywhere else. Those closest to the decision gain speed. Those affected by it absorb uncertainty. And the benefit is asymmetrical. Power holders gain flexibility. Institutions lose leverage. The public inherits the fallout. This is why emergencies are so attractive. They convert discretion into dominance. Normal governance asks for permission. Emergency governance dares someone to stop it, and stopping it carries a cost. Delay looks reckless. Questions look disloyal. Restraint looks dangerous. So the burden flips. Instead of proving action is justified, critics are forced to prove catastrophe isn't imminent. That's an impossible standard, which means once the mechanism is activated, it sustains itself, not through force, through inertia. And the longer it runs, the harder it becomes to interrupt. Because by then, interruption looks like sabotage. And that's exactly what comes next. Then the pressure doubled. Another declaration, another justification, another reason why now was the wrong time to slow down, each move slightly more aggressive than the last, each framed as necessary, temporary, responsible, but taken together, they formed a pattern. Authority expanding sideways, oversight lagging behind. Institutions reacting instead of directing, and the speed mattered, because speed compresses choice. It shortens the window where resistance feels possible. By the time questions surfaced, momentum was already built. Plans drafted, chains activated, costs embedded. No single move looked catastrophic. That's the trick. Catastrophe isn't announced. It accumulates. And the system, now conditioned to respond quickly, stopped asking whether acceleration itself was the risk. At this point, saying no required more courage than saying yes. More exposure, more consequence, which is why the next shift didn't happen in policy. It happened in people. Here's where this reaches you. Not as theory, not as process, as consequence. When authority accelerates, uncertainty becomes ambient, and you live inside it. You feel it when decisions arrive already made, when explanations come late or not at all, when outcomes are framed as inevitable. You don't get a vote on urgency. You inherit it. Families plan around stability. Jobs depend on predictability. Markets, prices, deployments, supply chains, they all assume rules will behave tomorrow the way they did yesterday. Emergency power breaks that assumption. And when the system becomes unpredictable, the cost doesn't land on decision makers. It lands on people who can't hedge risk, who can't relocate consequence, who can't opt out. If you're still watching, it's because some part of you knows this isn't abstract, that this isn't someone else's problem. Pay attention to that instinct, because the next phase won't announce itself loudly, and missing it won't feel dramatic. It will feel normal. This doesn't stay contained. Systems like this never do. When authority accelerates in one place, it distorts expectations everywhere else. Partners start recalculating. Allies stop assuming. Adversaries start testing. Language that once reassured now unsettles. Commitments sound conditional. Silence gets reinterpreted, and the damage isn't immediate. That's what makes it dangerous. Trust erodes quietly. Agreements weaken at the edges. Coordination slows because no one is sure which rule still applies. Global systems depend on predictability more than goodwill, on consistency more than intent. When unpredictability enters the equation, everyone compensates. They build redundancy. They hedge alliances. They prepare for instability instead of cooperation. That preparation has consequences. Resources move, costs rise, risk multiplies. By the time it shows up in headlines, the shift is already complete. And the most unsettling part is this: no one can point to the exact moment it started, which means no one is sure how to stop it. And that uncertainty is about to accelerate. From here, the system doesn't collapse all at once. It branches. There are three paths, none of them clean. The first is adjustment. Institutions adapt just enough to survive. Limits are reasserted selectively. Power slows, but only under pressure. The system holds, but thinner, narrower, more fragile than before. The second is erosion. No dramatic break, just continued accommodation. Each exception justified by context. Each boundary softened by precedent. Authority doesn't seize control. It's given room, piece by piece, until restraint becomes optional. And then there's rupture. That's when a future decision hits resistance too late, when momentum meets reality, when a move assumed to be reversible isn't, when escalation outruns consent. Rupture doesn't announce itself as failure. It arrives as confusion, conflicting orders, fractured legitimacy, institutions pulling in different directions at once. None of these paths are guaranteed. All of them are plausible. What determines which one we take isn't ideology. It's whether pressure keeps replacing permission. And that question is about to be answered. There's a temptation at moments like this to look for reassurance, to assume the system will correct itself, that norms snap back, that pressure fades. But systems don't heal by default. They respond to incentives. What happens next will depend on what behavior gets rewarded, whether restraint is protected or punished, whether saying no carries a cost that others are willing to pay. Because once power learns it can move faster than accountability, it doesn't forget. It waits. The danger isn't a single decision. It's the memory the system forms afterward. If emergencies remain useful, if intimidation remains effective, if oversight remains optional, then this moment won't be remembered as a warning. It will be remembered as rehearsal. So don't watch this as drama. Watch it as instruction, as a live demonstration of how authority tests its limits. Stay with this story. Follow the next move, not the loud one, the procedural one. Because the future won't turn on a speech. It will turn on whether anyone still knows how to stop the machine once it's running. I'll see you in the next one.